All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dunk on AP podcast. Today, we're going to be dunking on AP World, talking about 4.1 and 4.2, and really going to be focusing on technological innovations in maritime empires and the exploration causes and events from 1450 to 1750 in maritime empires. So, without further ado, let's go dunk on AP. So, a little reminder of the lay of the land of what's going on. Remember, in Unit 3, we talked so much about the Gunpowder Empires, the Ottoman, the Safavid, the Mughal, to a lesser extent the Russian Empire, to a lesser extent the Qing, to a lesser extent the Tokugawa Shogunate. So today we're really going to be focusing on the maritime empires over in Europe. So remember that Europe at this point was really kind of a backwater culturally. They really are not that big of a deal, nearly the way that the rest of the continent or the Eurasian subcontinent that they're on, the way that they are. So whenever you look at Europe, really what's happening right now is the Renaissance. They're coming out of the medieval times, the Dark Ages, and they're trying to sort of gain back what they had when they were the Roman Empire. So with the Renaissance, it's a period roughly 1300 to 1600 of intense artistic and intellectual activity said to be the rebirth of Greco-Roman culture. It usually divided into an Italian Renaissance from roughly the mid 14th to 15th century and a northern or transalpine Renaissance from roughly the early 15th to the early 17th century. So let's get the lay of the land. New and existing inventions are making sea travel easier in this time from 1450 to 1750. These aren't necessarily brand new. A lot of them are just innovations on existing inventions. Europe's population is growing, and not all workers can find work and food, especially in these smaller countries like Britain. The Christianity splits are also causing religious minorities to leave Europe in search of freedom. Remember that the church has split due to the Protestant Reformation and Martin Luther. You now have the Protestant sect and the Catholic Church. So now you've got religious minorities that are kind of looking for a place to go and practice their religion freely. You've also got primogeniture laws, which give all of the estate to the oldest son in the family. This leaves little for the rest of the sons. And as new areas are discovered, and of course I'm putting that in quotes, there's going to be competition among countries like the maritime empires that we're about to talk about to colonize and settle it. These countries are after wealth, glory, and Christian converts, sometimes referred to as God, gold, and glory. Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, and Holland are the maritime empires, and that they're called maritime because their empires are based on sea travel. One of the big reasons why this is happening, why the maritime empires are spreading, is because of the inability to trade very effectively between Europe and China, because the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal empires are right there in the way, blocking the way, particularly the Ottoman and Safavid empires. So a lot of what is going to drive this technological innovation in these maritime empires is going to be the desire for easier and less expensive trade with China and the rest of South Asia. So that's a big motivating factor here. Some key terms to know are the Portuguese and Spanish caravel, a ship, and we're going to talk more specifically about these ships here in just a minute. The Dutch flute, the Portuguese carrack. Of course, the lateen sail is being used here. That's not a new invention. We know that comes from South Asia in the last, really in units 1 and 2. But people are still using that. And then you've got the Chinese compass. Also, you've got improved astronomical charts that people are using. So to sort of differentiate between these ships real quick, the carrack was about 150 feet normally. It usually had square sails in lateen on 3 or 4 masts. The purpose of the carrack was trade, and the primary users were Portugal. The centuries of peak use were the 14th to 17th century. Then the caravel was about 75 feet, slightly smaller ship here, about half the size of the carrack. And it had lateen sails on 2 or 3 masts. Its purpose was for long voyages at great speed. The primary users of this ship were the Portuguese and the Spanish, and the centuries of peak use were the 15th to 17th centuries. Now, the flute, which was about 80 feet long, a little bit bigger than the caravel, its sails and masts were square, the sails were square, and they were on about 2 or 3 masts. And then you had the purpose for the flute was trade, and the primary users were the Dutch. The centuries of peak use were 16th to 17th century. And so the big idea to understand here is that combining navigational techniques invented in Europe with those from other areas of the world led to a rapid expansion of exploration and global trade. So some important historical developments to understand here. Remember that up to this point, All of these empires on the Eurasian continents, even since 1 and 2, they have been sharing knowledge, technology, science, and math through conquest, through trade, things like that, through the sharing of religion, through crusades. And so Europe is getting that stuff during the Renaissance, and it's starting to catch up to the rest of the Eurasian continent. So what you're going to have here is the causes and events of exploration. So you've got the galleon, which was a sailing ship that was in use, especially by Spain, from the 15th through 17th centuries, originally as a warship and then later for trade. Galleons were mainly square rigged and usually had 3 or more decks and masts. And this was sort of to try to find or work through the Northwest Passage. Now, some important people of this time, just to kind of blow through them really quickly. We'll talk a little bit more about them later, all of them later. Now, the Portuguese had Prince Henry, the navigator, who was relevant there around 1394 to 1460. He initiated the Age of Exploration. Then you had Bartolome Dias, who was about 1450 to 1500 CE. He was a Portuguese explorer, first European to sail around the tip of Africa. Then you had Ferdinand Magellan. All of these still Portuguese, by the way, 1480 to 1521. The first European to sail the Pacific Ocean and the first to circumnavigate the world. You'll notice that a lot of those firsts belong to Portugal, and you'll see that that is not a coincidence. We'll talk more about that here in just a minute. Now, for the French, you had Jacques Cartier, who was about right around 1491 to 1557. He was a French maritime explorer of Canada and North America. And then for Spain, you've got a name, of course, that you know, Christopher Columbus. It was about 1451 to 1506. He was the first European to reach and explore the Americas. Then you had Francisco Pizarro, who was about 1491 to 1541. He was a Spanish conquistador who conquered the Inca Empire, and founded Lima, Peru. Also, you've got Hernan Cortez, about 1485 to 1547, a Spanish conquistador who conquered the Aztec Empire. Now, some important rulers to know, so I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. And we'll talk more about these later. But you got King João of the Third from Portugal, about 1521 to 1557. He was the Portuguese king who oversaw exploration and expansion. Then you've got the sort of historical power couple, Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain. King Ferdinand unified Spain through the Reconquista, the taking back of Spanish land from from Islam. He supported exploration of the Americas, and his wife was Queen Isabella. Queen Isabella united Castile and Aragon with marriage to King Ferdinand II and financed Columbus's trips. And then you've got France, King Louis XIV, 1638 to 1715, the Sun King, an example of absolute monarchy, and the longest-serving monarch. Then you've got Elizabeth I, the Queen of England, 1533 to 1603. She was the English queen, the daughter of Henry VIII. She supported arts and Protestantism. So some of the causes of exploration here. Remember, European states at this time are starting to tighten up and really burst onto the scene. Before, you had them much more disunified, and they were really ruled by kind of like local villages, local landowners. But now you're starting to have much more centralized monarchies. European states had consolidated their power, and they've increased their income. Taxation systems are helping them to do that, and then also them establishing absolute monarchies. So states really want access to this sort of new world that is going to be discovered, and you're going to see that rivalries start to form. Whereas before in Unit 3, you had the Ottoman versus the Safavid. You had Sunni versus Shia, Safavid versus Mughal, Songhai versus Morocco, Russia versus Qing. Now the rivalries are going to be Portugal versus Spain, England versus France, the Netherlands versus Portugal, England versus the Netherlands. Basically, these that are competing to get these sweet, sweet resources in the new world. So that wealth, that power, and that new technology, plus the new desire to spread religion after the Protestant Reformation is going to be a major cause for why these people want to explore. Another big motivating factor is the idea of mercantilism. So this is an idea that it's an economic practice by which governments use their economies to strengthen their state's power at the expense of other countries. Basically, the idea is that there is a fixed amount of gold, wealth in the world, and you want your country to have as much of it as you possibly can. Now, some big events. There's wealth out there, and Europe wants a piece of it, but how is Europe going to get it? Remember, Europe wants to at first trade on the Eurasian continent, but the Ottomans and Safavids in particular are blocking them from doing that. They're making it difficult, particularly the Ottomans are making it difficult. Yeah, you can buy Chinese products from the Ottomans, but they're a lot more expensive. So Europe wants to find a sea route to China for the sake of making more money and for the sake of buying things cheaper. Portugal is really going to be one of the first ones that takes an early lead. And if you take a look at Portugal on a map, it makes sense because they are right by the ocean. There's really nowhere for them to expand other than onto the ocean. And so they are going to be the ones that sort of take the leap and really are the best at seafaring and exploration at first. Prince Henry the Navigator is going to initiate the age of exploration. And like I said, Portugal takes the early lead in using and developing new methods and technology. Bartolomé Diaz, from 1450 to 1500, he is going to be the first European to sail around the tip of Africa. Then in 1497, you've got Vasco da Gama. He's the first European to sail to India. Again, all of these are establishing better trade relations and better prices. Then Spain is right behind Portugal in the age of exploration. Christopher Columbus, okay, he is going to discover the Bahamas. It's not what he thought he had discovered, but it is relevant because he reaches and explores the Americas, and that is going to open up a whole new world of possibilities and riches. We're going to talk more about Columbus a little bit later. Then you've got Ferdinand Magellan, and he is going to be the first European who is going to sail around the Pacific Ocean, and he's going to be the first to circumnavigate the entire world. Then you've got the Dutch who are also making their claim known, and the French who are making their claim known. The Dutch are going to be up around modern-day New York. The French are going to be up around modern-day Canada, but we'll talk more about them in a minute. But the driving factors that you need to understand, you have to understand why these kingdoms, these empires are doing this. It is for God, glory, and gold. Remember, the Protestant Reformation. Catholics are eager to share their faith. Protestants are eager to share their faith. But also they're gaining a ton of glory and esteem and status in lifting up the name of their country and themselves. But also they are making so much money. Spain's gold and silver imports from the Americas skyrocket at this time. So they don't necessarily think the world is flat, but they do just not realize that the other side of the world isn't there. So a big important term that you need to understand is the Treaty of Tordesillas. The Portuguese essentially get the Eastern Hemisphere, whereas the Spanish get the Western Hemisphere. And that is why you are going to see so many Spanish claims in places like South America, Mexico, and in the Americas, whereas the Portuguese are going to make much more money trading on Indian Ocean trade network routes. So Portugal takes Brazil and creates a trading post empire in the Indian Ocean. So Portugal is on this side of the world, but it's Brazil. And remember, they still speak Portuguese in Brazil. In Spain, they create a colonial empire in the Americas, all over the place. Then with England, the Netherlands, and France, they explored the North Atlantic and established settlements. Trading post empires, to define that real quick, are states established, are trade routes, basically, that states have established control over with fortified trade cities. Those are trading post empires. They're trade routes with fortified trade cities that states have established control over. So we've talked a lot about Portuguese exploration. We've talked a lot about Spanish exploration. Really quick, let's hit on French exploration, British exploration, and Dutch exploration. We're going to talk more about these in future units. But Jacques Cartier in 1535, he sails from the Atlantic Ocean into the St. Lawrence River at today's northern U.S. border. And he claims part of modern-day Canada for France. Samuel de Champlain he's going to explore from 1609 to 1616, and Cartier realizes that there are riches there, and the French establish a trade post called Quebec. And of course, in Quebec, they still do speak French. That should help you remember that the French are the ones who settled it. Now, for the French, they were trading furs with the local natives, and they also had a lot of Catholic missionary activities. They're not as numerous as the British will be in modern-day America. They're only about 70,000 there by around 1754. Now, British exploration. 1497, the English king sends John Cabot to America to look for a northwest passage. Cabot lands just south of Chesapeake Bay, but he can't really defend it. And Britain really won't have a major presence. They'll have Roanoke in the late 1500s, but that doesn't stick either. In 1607, the British will establish Jamestown, which is a profit-seeking venture established by the British Crown. and through a joint stock company called the Virginia Company. Now, Dutch exploration, the Netherlands, 1609, Henry Hudson explores the east coast of America and claims the Hudson River Valley and sets up New Amsterdam. So you've got trading post empires, particularly on the eastern half, and then you've got big, just massive empires that are being set up by Spain, to a lesser extent Britain and France, to a lesser extent Portugal on the other side of the world. So that's the big things that are happening here. European states sponsor exploration to gain wealth and power. Portugal takes the early lead, but Spain catches up quickly. And then England, France, and the Dutch also stake claims in the North Atlantic lands. So I know this was a lot. This is a big unit. This is an important unit. So hope you guys enjoyed Duncan on History. See you next time.